Early access games that have actually succeeded is uncommon to come by. We have all heard of games that was left in an unfinished state, either still in early access or just released, regardless of how broken the game actually was. Hell, even the infamous DayZ was in early access from 2013, only to be released last year. A lot of times, early access games bring a lot of concepts, ideas and promises to the table, which captures an audience in which they can gain the income that will help them develop this imaginary game. Rarely will games deliver upon all these things when it eventually stops receiving updates, regardless of whether or not it's out of early access. Noct is one of those early access games that was seemingly abandoned by its developers to be stuck in early access hell forever. Surprisingly, it's also published by Devolver Digital. So what's the game about? Noct is a 2D top-down survival game played in either multiplayer or single player. It's set in a post-apocalyptic world overrun by a variety of monsters. The most similar game in regards to the perspective would be something like Tequila. The game was created in a Unity engine for the PC, Linux and Mac. It was originally shown on Kickstarter and reached over the estimated goal, and thus appeared on Steam Greenlight and then in early access. The official website for the game does not have a lot to offer. It merely gives you a video, some GIFs, the general information about the game, and links to various other websites. Where the last Twitter post was from the 18th of May 2017, and its Facebook page has stopped existing. The entire game is viewed from a top-down perspective in black and white, simulating the feel of looking through the monitor on a satellite drone or an airplane. The overall art style fits the idea of viewing the entire game from this perspective, and it does a quite good effort of keeping everything to this style, even the main menus that has the feel of a monitor. However, some things in the world are easier to distinguish and make out than others. The art style also goes for the monsters in the game, as they are viewed as white figures, detailed just enough as to not give us too many details in how they look, as they are more horrifying by the fact that we don't know how they completely look. The camera also has 3 different modes. The first mode is what you start with. The second is the inverted, often seen on drones, which potentially could help you see certain stuff better, but I never found it useful. And the third and last option is the minimap that allows you to see the surrounding area, and you're not paused while in this mode, meaning that if monsters are close, you can potentially die from them. When you open the menu, it does not pause the game, not even in single player, which can lead you to getting killed while you're browsing the options. The actual gameplay revolves around gathering supplies and weapons in order to survive against the monsters that have infested this world. Firstly, there are 2 different builds of the game. I will be talking about the current version first. The current build consists of roaming around a small map, scavenging for weapons and other useful items, such as a bunker consumable that upon being used places a bunker which the player can use to hide in. The game has a 4-minute timer that is counting down to what is called a cataclysmic event, which is a game over state if you don't manage to hide in the bunker. You can type out anything you want to say, keeping in the style of the rest of the game. However, this method is slow and clunky and can make you quite vulnerable when typing. This feature was likely implemented to be used with other people, but considering the fact that the other people in these types of survival games usually have itchy trigger fingers, a slow and clunky communication mechanic seems bad. The monsters are quite frequent in this version, and there is, as far as I know, only 4 different types of monsters. The 2 smaller minions, which will simply lower your health until finally killing you, and the 2 bosses that will insta-kill you if you get too close to them. They're easy enough to kill, hence the frequency of monsters in this build. Regardless if you die or not, after the 4 minutes has passed, it will count your high score and add it to the overall score, and then another day starts, where you do the exact same thing. There isn't a lot else to do in this build of the game, and this version was put out after the developers decided that giving the players an unfinished story would impede the game. And through this decision, all prior updates were scrapped and the current build was used instead, giving us the gameplay but without any narrative and any progression. The older builds are vastly different from the current one. These older versions had you controlling a random character that was led on the way by a mysterious person simply called XMIT, which you would interact with to try and gather more information of the world and the monsters inhabiting it. In this version, the map is quite larger and the monsters are far less frequent but more deadly. One hit kills you regardless of monster type, and you'll take control of another randomly spawned character somewhat close to your previous corpse, so there isn't a game over per se. Whenever a monster is nearby, your character will say the line "uh-oh", and the tone of the game will change. This is the same for both builds of the game, but it seems to be more useful in this version as the frequencies of monsters are smaller. As mentioned before, you're almost always under attack from monsters in the newest version, which gives you less breathing time, thus ruining the tension in a way. The monsters also seem to be more lively and animated while moving around, and they will react more to being shot. A nice feature is that the monsters can seemingly break through the walls, making indoor areas unsafe as well. It is present in the newest build, but I saw it more frequent in this version. The camera would slowly move around in a circle, simulating the effect of a satellite, drone or an airplane. While immersive, it can be a bit disorienting at times, as well as annoying, not being able to change the directions of the camera yourself. What story there is can be determined as interesting, but very minimalistic at the time, only telling us the minimum and we have to fill in the pieces. This is not helped by the fact that the story really never takes off before it just ends, without giving us too much information, simply telling us to gather supplies, find others, and survive. Both versions had resources, but they were used differently. To replenish your stamina in the old build, you'd gather water, which meant that each time you ran, you'd deplete the amount of water you'd collected, until returning to thirsty again, which meant that you couldn't run before you'd gathered more water. I don't know what the rations was used for in the old build, as the food meter never depleted. Perhaps it helped you heal when you were wounded, but considering every monster kills you in one hit, that would have been a very weird feature. In the new version, rations merely give you more points for the end of the day. Sprinting merely replenishes after a while, and water isn't a thing. Where the new build has searchable containers, the old one merely has the items scattered on the ground, these items usually being guns. The game had or has multiplayer depending on how you look at it, where you could either team up with other players or kill them for their loot, similar to a lot of other early access survival games at the time. Given the fact that the game has been quote unquote dead for a couple of years, no one is playing online. In both versions, the game plays bare bones. The older versions at least had the story to keep you busy, while the current version just have you gaining a high score. It's quite clear that the game still needed a lot of work before it went silent. Both versions supposedly have the same soundtrack and sound effects. Both of them fits nicely with the theme and style of the game. Robin Thicke, the former guitarist of Guns N' Roses and Nine Inch Nails, teamed up with Wordclock, the experimental alias of Pedro Pimentel from the group Cryochamber that creates dark ambient. Together they created the atmospheric soundtrack that follows us through our adventure in Noct. The soundtrack is both bleak and gloomy, but at other times intense and heart-racing. This is helped by the fact that the soundtrack changes based upon the situation. For example, when simply walking around the map, it's merely a calm tone filling the background. While encounters with monsters will make the soundtrack more dark and gloomy. In the newest build, whenever you're close to the cataclysmic event, the soundtrack will begin to become more and more intense. The sounds in both versions are somewhat muted, strengthening the idea that we are viewing the player character from a camera quite far away from the actual place. The sounds have an oomph to them that makes them sound powerful despite being muted. So what happened to the game? The game was said to receive an update sometime in 2017, but it never happened. One of the biggest problems was that the current build was essentially a prototype with code that was very difficult to upgrade and tweak, meaning that they had to remake the game from scratch. From what I've been able to piece together, it was a combination of things. One major problem was, as one of the devs calls it, interweaving, in which subsystems upon subsystems would be added that each had to work in order for the other subsystems to work properly. One could perhaps say that it was an overly ambitious project for such a small team, trying to make the game as in-depth as they wanted it to be. But the problem could also lie in early access itself. Releasing an unfinished game to the public instead of releasing a finished product have both pros and cons to it. Noct, a third-party individual or the chief programmer behind the game, has been unofficially working on the game. He's been doing VODs in which he shows the development of the game. He's been quite upfront with what he's currently working on, and what he's planning on working on in the future. But when there's an actual update is unknown. Chris, or more commonly known as C3SK, has been silent for a couple of years now. Noct has said that Chris is still working on the game, but can work on his part before Noct is finished with his. Overall, the game is somewhat dead, and yet, at the same time, it isn't. It's continuously being developed on, and is planned to be fully released, but when that is, we do not know. But from what I've seen and discovered, I'm quite optimistic that the game will eventually release. I know for a fact that I wish Noct and Chris the best of luck in finishing the game. However, I would not say that I could recommend people buying the game in its current state, but I could recommend people to at least keep an eye on its progress if you find it interesting. I think the best thing to say to the situation of Noct is that a rush game is forever bad. A delayed game will eventually be good. My name has been Alexander Larsen, and thanks for watching.